So how's everybody doing? I think with some people were here last week, some people were not. And any spillover from last week that you want to clarify or comment on or debate about or argue or anything?
Yes, I've got something.
Good.
It's more of a comment than anything else. One of the things that I talked about last week is the anger issue.
Uh-huh.
And I recognize that particularly I have a problem dealing with social inequality.
Right.
That's what really stimulates my anger. And what I worked on is there's a very strong image of what I would know as Kali, but it's the Vajra Yogini.
Uh-huh.
And that kind of energy that looks angry, but in fact is, quote, wrathful. In other words, very strongly focused to cut through impurities.
Right.
So what I'm trying to do is to take my angry energy and instead turn it into the wrathful aspect, to cut through my own impurities, because I have the idea that if I was perfect in my mind, in my actions, in who I am, then that would, that's what I need to do to contribute to this whole mess that the world is in. Yeah?
Yeah.
So those are the things I'm working on, and it's been helpful.
Very good. So what's the difference then between the wrath and the anger? Fundamentally, how is that different for you?
It feels different. What is the essence of that? It's like, instead of wanting to kill what I see as being the bad guys,
right,
into that anger that wants to destroy,
right,
rather I am taking that intense emotion and saying, okay, let's look at myself. Am I perfect? I see these other folks as being the bad guys.
right.
What about me? And
Right,
so
good.
taking the wrathful aspect and wanting to be sure that I basically purify myself, that's
Good.
where my attention is.
Good, great. Yeah. I think that's one of the beauties of Buddhist psychology. And this, just to recap for a moment, that because people come into I notice on, people will watch this online, and then it's good, I think, sometimes to just be to keep the theme going throughout, so sometimes I will repeat. And I think, based on like what you were saying, that we have to be clear there is a difference between Buddhist psychology, as we know, and modern psychology. And part of the difference is the intention, right? And the other part, then there's a difference in how we see problems arise, and actually what a problem is, right? So we begin to make a shift, and it's interesting, isn't it? When we look at a Buddhist practitioner, whatever that means, it doesn't mean in the religious sense. Okay, so I want you to really understand that when I talk about a Buddhist practitioner, I'm really talking about a spiritual practitioner. Okay, I don't use the word religious in that sense. A religious practitioner is different in my mind. So a spiritual practitioner is someone who is focused on, or maybe focus is not the right word, who makes the distinction that that there's an unlimited potential, or there's a potential in the mind to be transformed into goodness. Okay, there's a now if we get more specific, that goodness we could say is mental health. But again, in the context of the Buddhist psychology, mental health is quite a deeper understanding, or deeper explanation, than in modern psychology. The reason is that, remember we talked last week, there is no, if you go through the DSM-5, there's no definition of mental health. There's 300 definitions plus of mental disorders. But you search in that book, and I granted that's not the whole Bible, but it is kind of the foundation for diagnosis and what many mental health professionals are looking at. I had to get trained in diagnosing, and had to diagnose dozens and dozens of, maybe hundreds, I don't know, of clients and patients. And so we look at those disorders from, all the disorders, 294, I think, and plus their subsets. And you just take something like anxiety, which has many different subsets. And if you look at anxiety, so the difference between in Buddhist psychology, Buddhist approach with anxiety and the approach of modern psychology, they're going to begin to diverge after a short time. We'll all agree that the issue for all of us is to feel good, just feel good, right? So anxiety feels terrible. So, and so where it gets tricky, and, I'm going to push this, I like to push it a little bit, provocative, is where it gets difficult, pushy, provocative maybe, is that in the Buddhist articulation of happiness and suffering, or mental health and mental disease, is a pretty much a long-term articulation. So there's no doubt that when someone's stricken with anxiety, it has a mental, is mentally suffering, has a mental disorder, whether you're talking about Buddhist psychology or modern psychology. Okay. So that's actually not so much the issue here. The issue is how we make sense of that anxiety. Okay. The other thing is, what's the goal with anxiety? And if you know that, for the most part, and again, I'm generalizing, so I'm happy to understand people that I'm generalizing. I'm not talking in sort of unique cases or exceptions, but in general, in modern psychology, we want the person to feel better, okay, to feel non-anxious, right? Anxiousness feels bad. So I wouldn't think that there's any difference in Buddhist psychology, but the approach is different, because in Buddhist psychology, Buddhist therapy, Buddhist approach, it's a little bit brutal in that, if you're seeing a Buddhist therapist, quote unquote, like a Lama, certainly that person will care that you're feeling anxious, but he or she, the Lama, the professional, so to speak, is mostly going to be focused on helping you relieve your anxiety forever. Okay. And because of that, you may not feel so good when you leave that room. You may not feel that much better. It's a long process, and there's many. So that's where the philosophy of Buddhism comes into play. Okay. And I think the philosophy is just related with the psychology. They're not separate. The psychology arose from the philosophy, I guess you would say. So again, I hope you have something to drink. I feel really a little self-indulgent having my coffee. So if you take something like anxiety, then so I think there's a place, we talked about it last week, there is a place for the emergency room doctor. I mean, come on, we need that. But we're talking about something a little more expansive. So one year at the monastery where I was living, at Cayton Monastery, I don't think I told this story yet. If I did, I'm sorry to repeat myself. I can do that. So one year that we're at the monastery, early years, probably like 1979 or something like that. And we run the 1 month Cayton course in November, and it's still running. It's in the 45th year. It didn't last couple of years because of COVID. It hasn't run. But and there was we attracted a lot of people for different reasons, and some people were not, one or two maybe not so mentally balanced when they would come in. And so there was one woman, I think from Germany, I'm not sure. One woman, as she's going through the meditation course, she started to become, I guess you'd say, psychotic. She was having like a psychotic episode or psychotic break. And she started manifesting like a snake, and hissing at people and making gestures like a snake at people and being pretty weird, right? I mean, not very conscious in the sense of being a human consciousness. She was more like being a snake consciousness. And then it got worse and worse, and there was many people uncomfortable, and she was definitely not in a healthy state of mind. And then at some point she started breaking some windows, one of the shrines there. And so I was responsible. I wasn't a therapist or anything, but I was responsible for organizing these courses along with my wife. And we were like basically the only two Westerners that were there year round, because I had a non-tourist visa, which were very hard to have come by. And so I remember going up to see Lama Yeshe about this issue because it was getting out of hand. And as I went up to Lama Yeshe's room, I could hear outside. I stood outside and I could hear the meditation course leader who, did I tell this story already? No, okay. So I could hear the meditation course leader, who was an American nun, and very gentle and soft woman. And I could hear her having this sort of discussion with Lama Yeshe, saying, something like, well, Lama, she's really, this is 1979. So you got to remember what the conditions it was very primitive in Nepal then. And she said, well, I could hear Lama Yeshe saying, well, she needs a doctor. And then this nun saying, but Lama, where in the world is a better place to help someone than in this monastery? It's the foundation of kindness, compassion, well-being, mental health, spirituality. And Lama was having none of it. He said to her, no, she needs a doctor. And then the nun was arguing back. I can't. Then Lama said, you need to take her to Shanta Bhawan, which was the hospital. And if you've seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, for example, that was a luxury compared to what you could imagine would be at Shanta Bhawan. And so, so she's arguing back, saying, I can't take her there because we should be able to take care of her. And finally, I heard Lama kind of slam his fist down on the table and say, she needs a psychiatrist. And again, the nun's arguing back. Then he slams his hand down on the table, and he said, take her to the hospital. Buddhism is for healthy people, dear. So we need to make a distinction between, now a lot of people, and there's a lot of literature now about using Buddhism in therapy, and there's definitely many interventions and many ideas within Buddhism that can help the modern day therapy and therapeutic approach in terms of mindfulness practice and mind training and anyway, many things. But that, I would say, is a modernization of Buddhism, and it's not authentic, fair to say. I mean, that's my opinion. I was going to write a book, I don't know, maybe I still will, called Beyond Mindfulness, because what's happening is, I think that we'll see after a while, mindfulness has taken off. It's a big topic. It's great. It creates positive mind states, good for, but I think people are going to eventually become a little bored with it, just like they do with everything. But in particular, the ones that are looking for deeper spiritual connection, in a spiritual path. The way mindfulness is taught in a secular sense, it won't take you very far in terms of a spiritual path, in terms of spiritual development. It definitely will help your mind become more trained. But what do in actual Buddhist philosophy and psychology, the idea that training the mind is not the goal. I mean, I could say it is the goal, but in this context, it's not the goal, because the question then comes up, why train the mind? Okay. So anybody have an idea why that would be more of an issue, I guess, more of a focus, that training the mind is the therapy. But therapy for what?
Well, training the mind, mindfulness is really useful in the United States because we're in a capitalistic society. Right. So training the mind makes us more driven for like output in our work, not necessarily spiritual development. Mm-hmm. And in Buddhism, it's liberation of the mind that we want to know.
Correct. So Exactly. So mind training is sort of the methodology for liberating the mind, right? Yeah. So that idea of liberating the mind, I can't wait for when that gets incorporated into the modern conversation about psychology. And it won't be for everybody, but there are a lot of people. For example, if you look at 12-step programs, a lot of people are going to 12-step programs because they're looking for a higher purpose. They're looking for a spiritual path. And 12-step, of course, helps with addiction and alcoholism and that sort of thing. But many of the people going there are introduced to the fact that, a higher power and that sort of thing. But then I'm not sure there's much of a spiritual path to help them develop a higher power, to come in touch with a higher power. They try. But just by the fact that I think if we were to, I don't know, take some sort of survey of people in 12-step programs, I would say I don't know if any of you have experienced 12-step programs, but I'm guessing, I don't have a lot of experience. I have clients that, but my thought is that a large part of the population 12-step are actually looking for well, as you said, liberation, but a spiritual experience, a spiritual lifestyle. And we search for it in drugs and alcohol. There's no doubt, I believe. So those are my points. I'm trying to just see something now. Any other questions, points before I keep going? Blah, 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 blah.
Karuna, do you mind
Yeah.
me coming in every now and then?
No, I don't mind, as long as it's really good what you have to say. I'm joking. Yes.
Elton John,
Yeah.
there's maybe more than one film out there, but film made about him, and he's in his outrageous costume, and he crashes in, he leaves the stage, and he goes, this is only in the film, but it's based on something he actually experienced. It's something to see. That's my one-liner. Just watch that film where he enters the room, which is in the 12-step therapy thing going on.
Right. This is the new film, or is this an old film?
It's relatively new, last 3 years.
Okay, I thought it came out quite recently. I haven't seen it. Okay, I'll check it out.
Beautiful.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. So, is this what we're talking about? Is it germane to what you're looking for? Is it relevant? Yeah. So I'm going to go deeper if that's okay. Okay, let me find my. There we go. I'm just what I'm gonna do is we did some of these slides before, and I'm going to, oopsie, hang on a second, get over that. Dismiss all. I'm gonna go to, I think this. Yep, do you see that now, the slide? Do you see becoming your own therapist?
Perfect.
Okay, so, some of these we did. I'm going to go just read. So yeah, we read it. Did we read this quote? These days, right? Someone give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Did we read this? These days, people study and train to become, wait, hang on a second, this is in the way. These days, people study and train to become psychologists. Buddha's idea is that everyone should become a psychologist. Each of you should know your own mind. You should become your own psychologist. This is definitely possible. Every human being has the ability to understand his or her own mind. When you understand, when you understand your own mind, control follows naturally. That's right. We mentioned this last week or the week before. That's kind of a bizarre, well, not a bizarre, but it's kind of unusual thing to say, that when you know your own mind, control follows naturally. So if we deconstruct that just a little bit, because we have to get on the same page in that why we practice mind training is because the idea of mental health, this is so weird. I think it's very strange. The idea of mental health in the Buddhist context is having control. And usually we talk about control. Sometimes it's sort of a dirty word, isn't it? So controlling, or that sort of thing. But if Lama's saying here, control follows naturally, there has to be an acceptance and understanding already that the mind is not in control. Okay, so this is where we start sort of the foundation. And remember, we talked about the Four Noble Truths, and Buddha taught the first noble truth first, and it was the first thing he ever taught, which is the truth of suffering. And we're not in touch with that. I mean, I should say me, you might be, but when we are in touch with it in some ways, but not in a sort of complete sense. We don't accept the nature of suffering. It's almost too subtle. It's too subtle, and it's too profound, and it's too broad. Because as we begin to open our hearts and open our minds, there's a little bit of a panic that can go on, because more and more you see the depth of this world that we live in. I'm not talking just external world, but our reality, okay, our universe, internal universe, is in the nature of suffering, and we don't really articulate it that way, do we? So in this class, when we're talking about become your own therapist, we're talking about pretty much the grosser forms of suffering, like anxiety and depression and panic and fear and trauma, and manic depressive bipolar disorder, addiction, that sort of. But when Buddha is teaching the truth of suffering, he taught that there are three levels of suffering. Again, we talked about this before. And the three levels of suffering are, what's referred to firstly as the suffering of suffering. That's like the fact that when you're in pain, that's even animals experience that, the suffering of suffering, they know it. So suffering is just pain. And then that can be emotional pain also. So a lot of what the mental health realm is talking about is pretty much this first level of suffering. Is that strange? So it's only the suffering of suffering, because it includes emotional pain and physical pain. The second level of suffering, which is deeper, is called the suffering of change. And this sometimes gets misexplained. Misexplained, is that a word? Is misexplained a word? I'm into words, so as you can tell. So the suffering of change, I think this is more helpful, and maybe it's more helpful, I'm not sure, is that the mind continually thinks what it's experiencing is not changing. The mind continually perceives, experiences things as if they're not changing when they are. Okay. So this suffering is the one that's like, this one is like most of what we do in life and what we pursue. A better job, a good family, a relationship, a partnership, making sure our kids are well educated and they're safe. Being entertainment, through whatever entertainment we prefer, reading, internet, TV, films, going for walks, right? Exercise. When we approach exercise, for example, we're approaching it from the point of view that it's something that is, we go into expecting a good experience. So the endorphins are going to get activated. I'm going to stay in shape, get rid of a little bit of my stress, all those things. And we're approaching it. The mindset for that is that it's a permanent thing. Okay. We're not in it in the moment as something impermanent and changing. So when you look for the pleasure, for example, when you have a nice meal, whatever it is we do, all that, because it's in the nature of change, it's in the nature of suffering. And you can't say the food is in the nature of suffering. You can't say the exercise equipment is in the nature of suffering. You can't say, the waves when you go surfing are in the nature of suffering. You can't say that. They're kind of neutral. Okay. Even nuclear power is neutral, so I mean, some things are less neutral. It seems like guns and arms are less neutral, but in fact, they are not the nature of suffering. Those are objects made up of atoms. Follow me? In that sense, they're empty. They're empty until we label them. Okay? So when in the nature of change, what we label when we head out to go for a walk in the woods or along the beach, whatever it is, we're labeling that as something pleasurable. That's going to make me happy. Of course, we don't say that, because this is all the psychology of it, which is subtle. And this is why Buddha called it in nature of suffering of change. And the reason is because when we go into the beach, or into the woods, or meet a friend, or go to dinner, we're perceiving that event as something that's static. We don't see the changing nature of it. And there's nothing that's, well, I shouldn't say nothing, there's a few things, but for the most part, there's nothing that's not in the nature of change. So when we think about going to dinner, meeting a friend, there's nothing in our experience, not even the thinking of it, that isn't in the nature of change. However, what the mind does, it would be good. I can't make this a verb. It permanentizes it. Can I do that? It staticizes it, right? It freezes it. And we'll all sit here going, yeah, I know it's all changing. The atoms are moving 1,000,000 miles an hour. The image of my friend at the restaurant, even that, that thought, that image is moving, isn't it? You follow me? Let me get rid of the screen for a second, the slide. Okay. Can you see that, what I'm referring to? Any argument, any disagree? Well, you can disagree. I mean, any questions or discussion about that? Okay, so Erlanda is feeling a little cold, so she's putting on her sweater, right? Erlanda, when you put on your sweater, you had a sensation of like a little bit of cold, right? Your body senses it. But that's all moving, isn't it? Because if it was permanent, you would have been feeling cold all this time. So obviously you weren't. So it's moving. So now if you're like me, when you were putting on your sweater, you were thinking, the perception, the mind is confused. And it's going, this will make me happy. Now, happy, okay. We're talking about comfort. It'll take away the discomfort, because the cold was a little uncomfortable. That's why you put the sweater on. Okay. All of us are going to get uncomfortable in the next minute or two, because we're going to shift our position. Our legs might begin to cramp, or, our back's tightening up, or whatever. So, but the mindset, we don't come into the mindset. So it's impermanent, right? Everything's in the nature of change, but we freeze it and we try to hold it. Okay. And Lama Yeshe was beautiful in what he said. I mean, many things he said, but something that was quite sort of provocative that he said. He said, you people think the problem is with all the pleasures you have in the West. The Nepali people here would die for your lifestyle. He said, you should enjoy what you have in the West. You should enjoy it and take advantage of it. And so, all of us are a little bit confused by that, right? Because we're taught, attachment, desire is the whole problem, right? And he said, no, that's not the problem. The problem is clinging to it. Yeah, attachment. Clinging to it, attaching to it, grasping it, holding it. I never want you to leave, right? Now look, I'm the worst victim of it. You see this cup? This is called anyone heard of an ember cup? No. This cup is trying to defy what Buddha taught, because I'll tell you in a second. That was the last sip, and it was still really hot. So this cup is designed, it has some sort of chip in there, and it keeps your beverage, what you can set the degree, how hot you want it. And it'll keep it there. But guess what? It's only for an hour and a half. Then you have to recharge it. So they're trying to beat the wrong view of permanence. You know, they're trying to say it's not true, but you can't find anything, not even this life, right? Okay, so that's the second one. We covered that a little bit last week. The third one is the most difficult one. Okay, I'm going to go back to my slides. Why do we see everything as permanent? Why? Intellectually, we can all sit here and go, yeah, I know, Karuna, you're right. Yeah, I can see the atoms are changing. So first of all, we could agree scientifically, physically, everything is in nature change. The molecules are moving, the atoms are shooting around, and right? We can accept that. Anyone argue with that? Okay. So what isn't known as commonly is the mind is the same thing, isn't it? The mind's constantly moving, isn't it? Anything fixed in your mind?
My name.
Your name? So when you die, you're going to have the same name when you get reborn?
I hope so, but probably not.
So it's not permanent, is it? It seems permanent. So yeah, I mean, it's something, it's like your house. It's there, but your name, if I say your name, right? If it's permanent, then it will have no beginning, middle, and end, but you have Erlanda, right? So it is moving. I mean, there are things that seem that they're not moving, granted, like ice, frozen ice, or but they are in the nature of movement. There are some now, I will say there are some things that are permanent, that are non-changing. There's a few things. One thing that's permanent is kind of like what you say with your name, is mental images that arise for us. They're permanent. They don't move moment to moment. They're like frozen, but we don't think that, so when I think, like, let's say I'm thinking of my sister and I see her, that mental image is permanent. It's not changing moment to moment, but it's what they call a temporary permanent. It's kind of weird because it will fall away, won't it? It will, I don't always hold that image. That image then disappears. So, and also it's false. So I think, so I'm angry. If I'm angry with my sister, don't we all do this? You have this conversation with her in your head. If only she did this, and why don't you be more sensitive? And why are you, why don't you spend your own money on this? And why did you do that? Why are you calling me in the middle of dinner? Right? But that argument we're having, in this case, argument, let's say. So that argument we're having with your sister, my sister, that is with a mental image, isn't it? It's not with her. We all do that. When you wake up in the night and you're struggling with something, you wake up and you can't go back to sleep, and you're having that conversation with that person who, whatever. Well, we're having a conversation with a fixed image that's not changing. That is permanent. It's true. But it's also not who the person is it? It's just a picture. It's a mental image. We think we're having an argument or discussion with a person in a way. I mean, of course, if someone says, "Oh, you're just tripping out," you go, "Yeah, I know that." But when we're doing it, we're hypnotized, we're tricked into thinking it's the person, aren't we? And then you kind of wait, "Oh, what am I doing? I'm just arguing with this mental image," and it loses power. Then, by the way, it does lose power. And anyway, that's an interesting technique that we can work on with anxiety in particular, is to look at the mental image that we're anxious about. So if we're fearful of giving a demonstration tomorrow. It's there's the anxiety, but then there's also a projection on the event, isn't there? That projection on the event is fixed and permanent, frozen. Okay, and that's just a mental image, but we don't know that until we see it. And we go, wow, I'm really nervous about that mental image. Well, what is it really that's, and what's really going to happen doesn't even exist yet, does it? So we're struggling with a mental image because it's what's showing up in our face or in our mind. But if we get more and more in touch with reality, the future is not even, it doesn't even exist, does it? And that's the wisdom side that makes Buddhist psychology so powerful. Remember, we talked about it, Jay, I think a few weeks ago, when I told you that you mentioned about anger then, and I said, well, really the only true antidote is wisdom. You've seen the reality of ourself and of the other of the object, and that is the remedy, which is, everything. Actually, everything in Buddhist psychology and philosophy is really designed to help us have that that understanding, that perception, that experience. Not not just from a conceptual point of view, but from experiential meditative point of view, experience.
I would like to share a compassion pathway that I do use with my anger, however.
Good.
Which is this: when I, instead of thinking that person has been my mother for many lifetimes, I think instead that person has been my child.
Yeah,
and if they were a baby, how would I feel like, wouldn't I be, I would just think they were cute and sweet.
Right.
And it changes my energy dramatically.
It's a very powerful. Thank you. It's very. My wife often reminds me. We see someone who's in trouble, or whatever, someone who's not so, someone you don't like or something, or a homeless person or something like that. And she's helped me a lot. She says, God, that person has a mother, and that mother just will see her child for the most part. Mothers, even though mothers err and all those things, I think there's a primal connection between mothers and maybe fathers too, but mothers and children, they have to get pretty messed up, but I think, anyway, sorry, I'm diverging. I'm just supporting what you're saying, because I think there's something very powerful in that archetype, if you want to put it that way. So thank you. Yeah, you feel very different, don't you, when you think it's your child? It has been your child, and they have been your child, our child. Yeah. Thank you. Let me go to this final thing here that I want to do. Okay. Okay. Did we talk about this one last week?
No.
No? Okay, good. To become your own psychologist, you don't have to learn some big philosophy like Karuna's talking about. All you have to do is examine your own mind every day. You already examine material things every day. Every morning you check out the food in your kitchen, but you never investigate your mind. Checking your mind is much more important. Lama Yeshe used to just continually tell us, we'd have some question, blah, 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 talking, and he'd often say, check up, dear. So meaning check up is meaning check your mind. And also when we'd ask a question or have some issue, he didn't think it was enough just to give the answer. He would say, check up, meaning you investigate whether what I'm saying is helpful or true or not. And the same thing I would like to say from what we're talking about. You need to check up. That is fundamental to Buddhist practice. Is don't even Buddha. Often we quote, right? Even it's a very famous quote from Buddha. saying don't accept what I say just because of me as the person. You test it like you would test gold, and if it, yeah, test as you would test as a goldsmith would test gold. So I think that's very refreshing. I heard that in my very first meditation course. I mean, very first teaching, I think, the Lama Zopa Rinpoche said that. And I thought, wow, you mean I'm allowed to question? It's not allowed, it's encouraged. And I had come from another tradition and had left that tradition where it was very faith-based. And I thought, what a liberating privilege to be told that you not only have the right to check, you need to check. And Lam Yeshe repeated that endlessly to us: check up, dear, check up, dear, you check up. And that's, so investigating the mind, that's meditation. Okay, that's mind training, that's meditation. And all these hundreds and thousands of techniques in Buddhist meditation practice are just different ways to learn what the mind is. I mean, really, that's what most of it is how the mind functions. And it's, all of our minds function very similarly, but the access to understanding how my mind functions, I'm going to access that understanding probably from a different angle than you're going to. And everyone's got, there's 84,000 different approaches in Buddhist practice. I don't know if that number's arbitrary or not, but the point being that everyone's individual, and if one size does not fit all, if it did, then Buddha would only have taught that one thing. It is true that once we are able to meditate and practice the ideas of the emptiness of inherent existence, that does purify all the problems. But how do we get there? That's the story. If that was the answer, then that's all that Buddha would have taught. The practices of that is all that Buddha would have taught. The practices in meditating on emptiness of inherent existence. But obviously, he didn't teach just that. He taught, well, there's the whole other wing of the teachings in compassion. Part of the reasons that we need, many reasons we need compassion, countless reasons, but one of them is that, as Buddha said, wisdom without compassion is like a bird trying to fly with one wing. And so just meditating on the wisdom side of the teachings we become extremists. That's the problem. We become extreme. And remember, Buddhism is referred to as the middle way. So it's the middle way, means the balance of wisdom and compassion, or wisdom and method being compassion. Okay. And this, of course, is not just philosophy. This is also how we become balanced and healthy. Balanced and healthy. And Jay referred to it earlier. I would argue that a healthy person, the more healthy a person comes through wisdom, let's say, understanding their mind, the more compassionate they become, the more kind they become. It's a natural. It's fascinating. We try to teach our kids and ourselves to be kind, but kindness will arise naturally from the understanding of wisdom, because part of what wisdom will teach us is the interconnection between all beings and all things. So that interconnection is what leads us to be kind, right? That's what leads us to be kind, that interconnection. Okay.
Can you be kind and compassionate, but be wrathful?
Yes. That's what Jay was referring to a little bit. Well,
okay.
Yeah, but let me qualify that, because that gets referred to a lot amongst us Western Buddhists, modern Buddhists, because I'm kind of, how to say this? I'm kind of wrathful about that one. I think that us Western people, modern people, should never use wrath. Now, that's an extreme statement, right? But the reason I say that is I see so many of my friends lose it or get angry. And they say, no, I was just being wrathful. I saw wrath. I've seen true wrath of an enlightened being with Lama Yeshe. He was, and other lamas, but I had a lot of experience with Lama. He manifested wrath. By the way, we've got, in referring to the Tantra practice, developing peace, increase, power, and wrath. So there are those four. I think we can develop power. Wrath, I think, the true compassionate wrath has no attachment in it. So it's a little bit, if I can just use a mundane example, it's like, and not to debate the, the subtleties of this, but it's kind of like a mother whose child is about to run across the road and she stops him, that in a wrathful way, because save his life. So it's that, I think, is wrath, compassionate wrath. Now, of course, we don't want to analyze it because there's ego involved and attachment and all that. True wrath has no attachment, no self, usually people who want to be wrathful, it has to do something with wanting something for themselves. And they're not being honest. So I have kind of a strong feeling. I think for us regular people, I think it's best that we develop peace. But I understand that there is a place for power and wrath. Okay. Increase are things like increasing generosity, increasing health, those kinds of things. As long as there's no attachment, self gain, then wrath. So wrath is really, I only care about that person, and the only way they're gonna learn is through wrath. Okay, so maybe we don't have to be enlightened to use wrath, but we have to be careful and not hypocritical. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that the West doesn't necessarily understand about Buddhism.
I agree. I don't like
possible to be wrathful, but in a compassionate manner.
I'm very uncomfortable with that having been, that secret having become public. And that happens. And then, by the way, that extends to many levels. Like, a lot of people are using Buddhist meditation and stuff to increase their pleasure. So again, as we know from this class, that's not the idea. There's nothing wrong with pleasure. It's good to feel good, but it's very hard to have pleasure without clinging to it. Very, very difficult, isn't it? Doesn't mean we shouldn't have pleasure. It just means we have to train the mind, have pleasure in the right way. Like Lama Yeshe said to me, "You don't even know how to enjoy a cup of tea." He was always criticizing me, by the way. So don't worry about it. In 9 years, he gave me one compliment. So, but no one loved me more than he did. Even my own mother, probably. But that was his.
What was the compliment? Sorry, what was the compliment?
Oh, what was it? Oh, I think we're at 7:00 now. The compliment was when Lama Yeshe fell ill before he died, a couple months before. I had the unbelievable privilege of accompanying him not secretly, but quite privately from Kathmandu to Delhi, because he had had a heart attack or a stroke. We don't know which one. So I and one other monk, a Sherpa monk, accompanied him to Delhi to take care of him, take him to the hospital emergency room. And so I was there a couple months with him, and we were kind of in seclusion because he did not want people to know that he was there. Of course it got out, and he was in the hospital like about a month. And then we went out to, this is all in the book, Big Love, by the way. Then we went out to what he called the farmhouse. It was a house out in the rural areas of New Delhi, And so we were out there, and then one day, for some reason, out of the blue, he said, I think we were reading Time magazine or something. He liked to read Time, me to read Time and other things, his letters. And he said to me, "So, I think you've improved." That was the compliment. And so I think what happened was, and I said to him, "Oh, Lama, that's due to your kindness. It's due to." And he said, "No, no, no, no. He said that's due to your Dakini's kindness, and Dakini is like goddess, or And he met my wife, because she's pretty tough on me too. The two of them, and I think I must have had like a little smug grin at that point, And then he completely turned wrathful again, and he got angry, wrathful with me. He says, "Don't be so proud. I found her for you." So that was his comment. It lasted about 30 seconds. So I think you've improved. So that was it. It is 7:01. Let me show one last. We just got a couple minutes. So we started late. Let me show you one last thing on the slide. That I was talking about the three sufferings. So I want to tell you what the third one is. Okay. Those look interesting, huh? Okay. So the third suffering, which is the deepest one, is our mind is in the nature of ignorance. It is possessed, overwhelmed, so that in fact, our suffering is pervasive because it goes from life to life. So you and I are talking now, right? And yet it's like a hallucination. Okay. I want to ask you something. If you know someone who's living in a complete hallucination, someone, let's say schizophrenic, wouldn't you say, "Oh, wow, that person's level of suffering is, I have bad knees, or I have, I don't have much food tonight, or I just lost my job, but compared to that guy," right? Wouldn't we say that? Wouldn't we say that? So someone who's schizophrenic or who's hallucinating reality. So this is where we can pick up next week, is that is considered pervasive suffering because we don't understand what is really there. We see what isn't there, and we don't see what is there. How much worse can it get? Maybe not. Maybe that's okay. Maybe ignorance is bliss, they say, right? But if what I see when I look at you, or I look at my wife and my kids, if what I see really isn't there, and what is there I don't see, that's disturbing to me. Now that I know that, right? That's disturbing to me. You can't unknow that, by the way. So you better be careful what you listen to in this class, because you can't unknow it. And that's a chalk drawing, right? That's a sidewalk drawing. There's no hole there. You knew that, right? Yeah. Okay. That is not three-dimensional in that sense. We see what isn't there. We see a hole. It isn't there. We don't see what is there, which is just a chalk drawing on the sidewalk. That's our whole reality, okay? If someone is driving around with a bomb in their trunk, in their boot, huge bomb that's going to go off anytime, would we say that person is in the nature of pervasive suffering, some kind of pervasive suffering? Yes. Just not knowing doesn't mean they're okay. That thing's going to go off anytime. Okay, there's a lot of things in our life that's like that. Okay, any last comments, arguments, questions, criticisms? I guess I won't ask for compliments, because I don't think Lama wanted me to get those. Anything else? Okay. Okay, thank you all. And this, before we leave, let's do something a little Buddhist. We didn't motivate in the beginning, but just think for a moment. Just we can talk about the first level of suffering, the suffering of suffering in this world right now. There's so much strife, so much sadness, with Ukraine, with limitations on people, still with COVID, poverty, you know, even climate change, or the drastic movement of the elements, creating hot, cold, wind, fire. It's like almost like there's no safety for very long, but particularly what's happening right now in Europe. And that we can, that why would we would learn these ideas and talk about them and study them and investigate them and check up, must be, for the benefit of others, not just our own well-being. So think that, that as Orlando said, that these are the causes, the imprints that'll lead to our liberation, but not just our liberation, because our liberation would be very selfish. So, but I can't help other people. I can't help other beings. So I need to be liberated in order to be of the most benefit. So I will attain liberation for the benefit of helping all other living beings. Okay? Animals and birds and insects and people and spirits, all the different kinds of beings, countless. Dedicate your energy towards that. Okay? Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming. And bring some questions next week, okay? Hard ones. Bring some hard questions. Okay? Thank you. Good night.